Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein, and the draft is officially behind us. For all of that study and that prep and the whirlwind that it is, it happens so fast. And here we
Mhm.
are, the Monday following the draft, with 11 new Packers to talk about. And we chatted about this in the DMs, right, as we do while it was happening, but really good draft class. I don't necessarily remember my takeaway from 2023, like my immediate thoughts, but I really like this class as a whole, and I can't wait to dive into these guys with you.
Me too. I just feel like as Goot goes along, he's building up a lot of like trust within the fan base. Not that he really cares what we think, but I feel like the consensus amongst people who have been following his drafts over the last few years is like he's been kind of hitting them out of the park. And so like when you come away from it, it's like if you haven't been following, or if you have been following, if you follow college football, if you know these guys really well, or if you just follow like the day of, it doesn't really matter. You feel excited about these players because you kind of trust the Packers process at this point because he's gotten really good contributions out of his draft classes pretty immediately over the last at least 2 seasons. Um, and if not, obviously, you gain the benefit of the doubt when you take a quarterback at 26 and he's your future franchise quarterback 3 years later. So I feel the same way. I think I was like pumped about it last season because there were a bunch of offensive weapons and we knew that they needed those. But I don't know if I felt as excited about the class, just like the way that this class really fills out the roster. I just feel like going into this season, this team feels really complete now. And we have no idea if they're going to pan out. Like this is
Right.
pure conjecture. But on paper and based on what I've watched of each of these players, they just feel like they fill all the holes that this team has been missing. Um, and that's kind of how you want to feel going into camp. And I just can't wait to see what they can do for this team.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's such a good point about going into last season. We weren't sure what the wide receiver room would look like, or last year's draft, I should say specifically. We wondered if that could be in play in the first round, or then, of course, they answered that with Jaden Reed in the second. But the tight end room was a mess. We knew that was a need. Their safety unit was Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford. We wondered if a safety could be in play in the first or second round. Brian Branch obviously being a draft crush of
Yeah.
many. So there were a lot more question marks going into that season. The O line with David Bakhtiari at left tackle, and would he be able to play? So this season really felt like the starters were just about solidified, and there were a couple spots that they needed to target. So safety, we saw, we'll talk about that. Ton of action there on days 2 and 3. Inside linebacker, beefing up that position, but yeah, more of a holistic rounding out of the draft and not
Mhm.
necessarily feeling like they had immediate holes to plug. So let's really quickly kind of talk about Jordan Morgan. We did a whole recap
Yes.
show about him already, but I thought it was interesting in the recap of the draft when Goody and LaFleur both basically said they want him to be left tackle first and let him compete there since that's what he did in college. So, did that surprise you at all, or does that make some sense to you as far as where you thought he'd go?
I think it makes perfect sense for two reasons. First, being if it's where he's most comfortable, get him in the building and start him where he's most comfortable. I think don't move someone from where they're naturally positioned, where they're naturally gifted, where they've been playing for the majority of their college career. I think, second, based on the way the Packers like to do things, it also makes the most sense, right? They usually get tackles in, naturally put them at left tackle, train them at left tackle, and then move them based on where they think their best skill set is, whether that's move them to right tackle or align them into the interior. So, like, for both of those reasons, I just think it just is the perfect fit and the perfect plan. I don't see why they would do it any differently. And also, I know that there are a lot of fans who are really high on Rasheed Walker. They think going into the season, if he was the left tackle, the Packers are ready to go, all set. I don't necessarily disagree with that. However, I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with there being competition there. That's the most important position on the offensive line, bar none. It is your QB's blind spot. So, like, again, I guess third reason, like bringing competition there, see how he stacks up. Likely he's probably not going to win the job out against the guy who started last year. But also, if he does and
Right.
he's better, then awesome. So, I think it's a great plan.
Yeah, I agree. I'm with you. And we talked about this, right? Like the Packers had Elton Jenkins as a draft selection, not necessarily thinking that he would play right away. And then he kind of is forced into it with Lane Taylor being injured and doesn't give the job back and, solidifies his role. So it's at the very least, you have a true backup swing tackle
Right.
and you feel pretty good about the depth in a room that you didn't feel like you had depth at before. So let's shift to day two because I think this is where Packers fans maybe had the most excitement of the draft, right? The first round was a pick maybe for necessity, but also best player available for the Packers. The second round is where I think it got fun for Packers
Mhm.
fans because these were some draft crushes that were selected. Talking about Edgerrin Cooper in the second round, first pick, and then Javon Bullard, the safety, with their other second round pick. So, what were your thoughts, when that was happening? I had to go through it all live on the Packer Day live show, but what were your immediate reactions?
So obviously the second round was a little bit of a, there was some movement, right? The Packers traded back. There were some guys still on the board that maybe fans felt like they could have gotten, they could have moved. Cooper Jean, Kool-Aid, who the Packers brought in for a visit. And ultimately they decided not to go with DB there. They waited. Um, if you listen to our preview show when we talked about, we broke down the first round pick and then we talked about some players that we hoped for on day two. Edgerrin Cooper was one of the players you and I both were looking at. They obviously also brought him in for a top 30 visit, so we knew he was on their radar. Linebacker for me has been like 1B after safety for need. At least on the defensive side. So I'm so glad they addressed it early. He is the consensus, essentially, like best linebacker in this draft.
Yeah.
And they got him not only on day two, but like they acquired picks in the process, which is just like such a good thing to do. I'm obsessed with him. I think he might be my favorite player that they took in this draft. The more I watch, the more I learn. Also his reaction to getting drafted, like how much I love the human side of this. It's just like so freaking awesome. I think he's the perfect tandem for Quay. I know they took another linebacker later on day two, so now I don't this room finally feels like not so scary that like one injury was not going to like decimate them and they're going to be left with this ginormous hole. I have learned since he was drafted that he's like beloved at Texas A&M, like beloved. Like every fan was like, he is the best. And I think that's a theme that you're going to hear us say as we talk about these players, that not only were they obviously wonderful football players on the field, but each of these guys were locker room leaders. I mean,
Yes.
true, either they were captains, like voted captains, or just like general consensus kind of like locker room leader fits. And I think for a young team, that's really important to get that like level of personality in. He was an All-American, just like very passionate, just like passionate off the field, passionate on the field. You can tell the way he plays. He's a hard hitter. He's a go-getter. Again, a theme I think in this draft is just like see ball, get ball,
Yes.
attackers. These guys are attackers. They attack the football. He had 8 sacks last season, 17 tackles for losses. Just like this is going to be a guy who's going to like make plays, and I think he's the perfect complement for Quay. Like the perfect complement for Quay. So I'm really excited to see what Halfley does with him.
Yeah, and one of the things I liked as I was kind of going back through all of the notes about him was that he played 2 years in a will role in a 4-2-5 base defense. So whether, and that's one of the things that they said, right? That they wanted him to be able to be position versatile with Quay, switch them around. Doesn't matter who's the Mike, who's the Sam, who's the Will, like
Mhm.
understanding all of that. And I think we're going to talk about that a little more as we get into the safeties as well. But versatility in this draft was so huge, finding
Yeah.
guys that can play multiple roles. We talked about it with Jordan Morgan and whether he can be a swing tackle or kick inside. Cooper's the kind of guy that can play just about anywhere in the middle of the defense and really fast flies to the ball when he does it. Um, Another theme here, of course, staying in round two, Javon Bullard, same way, right? Drafted as a safety, played a ton in the slot. Honestly, probably played some of his best football, if not his best football, in the slot, especially for the championship Bulldogs. Just a season removed from that. So whether he plays deep or he plays in the box or he plays in the slot, another position versatile player who is aggressive and loves to play football and smart and is just a see ball, get ball thumper.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when he was asked about it, he was like, I think he said something like, I'll pour water in your
Yep.
cup. Like, I don't care what I'm asked to do, I will do it. Like, total team player. And like, again, like all those things matter when you're driving. Again, obviously, like what you do on the field is probably like 85% of it, but like the rest of it really matters. I love him. I think you and I were obviously like Jaden Hicks stands, but like I any of these guys that they took that were available in the second round, I think are wonderful. And he's again a perfect complement to Xavier McKinney, which is I think when we were discussing this, like that's what you are really looking for. And I think to your point, he's super versatile. I mean, there's a lot of people who would probably be complimentary to Xavier McKinney because he is just a well-rounded,
Right.
high-end safety. But again, it's hard not to watch Bullard and be like, that's a guy who's going to attack you. I mean, these are players that will wrap up and tackle, are not going to let you get by them, right? Are going to like hit you hard and just like things that the Packers defense haven't had in a minute. You know, Georgia guy, obviously Goot couldn't go too long without taking a Georgia Bulldog. I really like this pick. I also think great value end of
Yeah.
the second
Oh, yeah.
round, like really, really good value. It was also a great video watching him super excited about
Yeah.
getting drafted to the Packers. Um, it's going to be really fun to watch. I think he's, to your point, like a really interesting one to see what they do with him. You know, like I think he can play free safety, but I don't know necessarily if they're going to ask him to do that given they have Xavier McKinney. Like, are they going to move him up? Are they going to play him in the slot? But like again, they paid Nixon. Just like going to be a really
Right.
interesting piece. Yeah.
Yeah, my dad asked me for like a quick summary of the Packers draft, like quick takeaways, and what I told him was proactive instead of reactive. And I think that is kind of the theme of this defense is you're seeing guys that
Mm,
are getting to the ball and attacking instead of letting the game come to them and being reactive and like backpedaling and trying to tackle they are being proactive and they're going to be at the football. And
yeah.
my dad was like, "Oh, I like that." Like, yeah.
Not playing 10 yards off the line on 3rd and 10. That's what
And
I'm getting the vibe of.
And I
Yes.
think what we also have to take with a grain of salt here too is that we have expectations for the Jeff Hafley defense the same way we had expectations for how Joe Barry would change the Packers defense. So this is like pie in the sky. These pieces on paper seem like they fit so well with what we think he will do. But again, we still need to see them execute. But as far as the fit on paper, can't really love it much more than we do.
Yeah.
So let's jump to the third round because I know that you have a lot of thoughts. Started the third round, pick 88, with running back Marshawn Lloyd, who Daniel Jeremiah said was his top running back of the draft class. So, what were your thoughts on that one?
Okay, so before I do that, also Javon Bullard was like some draft analysts were also saying he's potentially the best safety
Yeah.
in this class. So like the Packers got potentially the best linebacker, potentially the best safety, and now potentially the best running back. Somehow all on day two.
That's value.
I don't get it. I am obsessed with him. He might be. I know Cooper. I said is maybe my favorite pick, but like as far as guys who I think are going to contribute immediately. I mean, like game one.
Yeah.
So I say that because, and I don't say this because I think the defensive guys aren't. I'm just saying I think there are probably going to be some growing pains year one with a new defensive coordinator. There's probably going to be some things, right? I think that's like fair to assume. But like Marshawn Lloyd is ready to go as RB2. If you watch him, like he is, I mean, it's funny because he said his guy that he loves watching is Josh Jacobs. Like he is like, I watch him on tape. I can't wait to like be in the same building as him and like, learn from him. So like that's really awesome. They have like similar-ish body types. So like, he's a little bit stouter, but like his burst, he didn't run a really fast 40 time, but I feel like that doesn't translate to the field. Like when you watch him play, he's so damn fast and he's so hard to tackle. Like he's so hard to take down. I just feel like that pony package, like you and I have talked about this, that pony package is going to be so fun. The other thing that stood out to me is he didn't do it a lot in college, but everyone keeps saying he is going to be so good catching passes out of the backfield. And we know that's something the Packers asked their running backs to do. So I think watching him, I just feel like he's going to contribute right away. I mean, I'm sorry, AJ Dillon, but like, I really think he's going to step into that RB2 role and just like not give it up.
I mean, his numbers are incredible, and I know he played at USC with Caleb Williams and, but it's not like Caleb Williams had receivers that were all drafted in the first round. Like, there was still some offensive struggles with a guy like Williams at quarterback, and, he had 47 broken tackles, averaged over 7 yards a carry, and for a running back, I mean, he runs a 4.46, like, still very quick, very elusive, and
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that Brian Gutekunst mentioned too was despite having that like compact, strong build at 220 pounds, he is elusive and shifty. And while he's breaking tackles, he's also like a one cut. He's just one of those players, I think, on your field that at any moment can break a big one. And I
Yeah.
agree with you 100% that I think he immediately probably comes in slated at RB2. And AJ Dillon, I think, still has a role, especially as a pass blocker, a third down back, goal line back. We also like him out of the backfield as a pass catcher. But I think that as far as immediate contributors, Lloyd is a dangerous option for Matt LaFleur's offense.
Yeah. And I think there are definitely things he's going to need to learn, like pass
Like
pro.
fumbling.
Yes, I was going to say that. His fumbling was an issue in college, which I think is probably why he was, slated to go lower, like where he got drafted, like lower on boards. Again, I think that's something you can learn to not do. I don't think that's like just an innate thing. And pass pro, right? Like pass pro in the NFL is no joke. You're
Right.
going up against like some big ass dudes and you're going to get beat at some point, but he has the build for it and he's going to have to learn. He's not going to be an every down back by any means, but he's going to be a really nice compliment to Josh Jacobs. And I think he's being put in a nice position to learn behind both him and AJ Dillon. I mean, AJ Dillon's going to be a wonderful person to learn from as well.
Yep.
But I think he's going to be so fun. So fun.
Yeah. So let's jump then to the second inside linebacker selection for the Packers. Kind of surprising, I think, to fans watching, just that it happened so quickly after Cooper, even though I think going into this, we thought that 2 linebackers was absolutely in the realm of possibilities. They took Tyron Hopper out of Missouri, another kind of will linebacker who played in more of that 4-2-5 base. Didn't necessarily have like a full role carved out for him at Missouri, even though he was a 2-year starter, but super physical and really talented against the run. So I think there's certainly things for him to improve upon, probably not as on-field ready in the NFL as
Yeah.
Cooper is, but a lot of upside. Really another guy that likes to hit, is physical as a tackler, and a smart football player. And I think that's been the theme here as well, is smart football players and team captains, and Goody found a ton of them.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, this one was a surprise. I think people were kind of like, huh? I think he's more of the project, right? He's like the high upside toolsy guy, right? And you don't need him to start. You have your starters. If anything, he's going to be coming in as inside linebacker 4. I think even behind Isaiah McDuffie. So there's less pressure, time to get molded, and see what you can contribute. He's definitely going to be a special teamser.
Yes.
So that 100% like kind of a guy for Rich Pisaccia. Now, do you want someone drafted in the third round to be a special teamer? Likely not, right? There's question
Right.
marks there. But I think if you can develop into a rotational guy, um, by maybe like your second year, then yeah, it's a good pick. But definitely, I think the only head scratcher for me, although I don't mind again having depth at this position when the room was just like so decimated.
Yep, I'm with you. I think that it's a move that probably will make a little bit more sense as we get into camp and see how these guys are utilized. Because when you're looking at, potentially in a 4-3 base, you're having three linebackers out there. And we know that most of the NFL right now plays a base nickel, but there are certain packages where Halfley might have Walker and Cooper and Hopper out there at the same time. Maybe
Mm.
it's an obvious passing situation and they like his speed a little more than McDuffie. So I think we'll see kind of how they roll him out, and that'll be a ton of fun, especially in the preseason. Digging into then day 3, this is where the Packers really rounded out their roster, which is what we expected, right? They had,
Right.
oh God, that was some terrible quick math on my part. I was 6 picks on day 3 to work with and started off their only selection of round 4. They traded up to grab Evan Williams, the safety out of Oregon. So another not surprising move here, right? We thought the Packers would grab multiple safeties, and they did just that. Transferred from Fresno. And I thought his scouting report was really interesting because they said he has more of the build of a free safety with the physicality and the kind of instincts of a box safety. So, depending on how the Packers want to utilize him, another really position versatile player who is good at locating the ball downfield and reacting and hitting. And of course, I put it on Twitter, but if Sam Seal likes a prospect, I think you can just, you can have some confidence in that one, right? The dude found Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Clay Matthews, Greg Jennings, or James Jones, like those West Coast players, he really can scout out.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, he's it's been said that he was the best player on Oregon's defense, right? So this was, I think, by all, and they're a top, a very good college team. I don't think that's a hot take to say. So I think he is good value in the fourth round. He's again going to be depth. He's again, I think, going to be probably a teamer. Um, going to compete for like safety 3
Mhm.
behind what's likely, I think, inevitably going to be the starting tandem in McKinney and Bullard. But to your point, brings like that level of versatility and physicality that the room needs. And like you need the depth, you need the rotation. Um, I like it. I like that they came. I don't know how you feel about it, but I like that they came away from this draft with 3 safeties. Like I
Yeah.
don't see it as a negative. I think they addressed a position that, I mean, the room had nobody. Like they made the big splash in free agency, but they still had just McKinney and Anthony Johnson Jr., who's a 7th round pick last year. Like they needed to add in these guys, and I think they all bring like a different something different to the table.
Right, and
So
regardless of, like, how they felt about Anthony Johnson Jr., you still need depth, right? Like, regardless and whether they thought he could be a safety or a starting safety, there was no one else. Like, that room needed an overhaul regardless of how they felt about the guys that were already in it. So, yeah, I think the addition of 3 safeties made a ton of sense for them, and I think they all can play different roles. There's a world where you've got Bullard as your strong safety and Williams in the slot, and then Oladapo is like your will linebacker in certain sub packages. So we'll get there. But next in the 5th round, the Packers selected offensive lineman Jacob Monk out of Duke, and this was like one of my sneaky favorite picks. Um, I just love his versatility as well, which again, there's that buzzword, drink if you're following along. But he played center for the bulk of his career and has snaps at right guard, which we know is, a possibility of where the Packers could look to start him right away. Um, just 5-year starter at Duke, so a ton of experience, played a ton of football opposite guys like Graham Barton on that line, who we know was a first round selection. Um, one of his like pre-draft descriptors was that he is probably a backup center or guard just for any roster. So immediately he comes in as a depth piece and could theoretically compete with Josh Myers, who is entering a contract year.
Yeah. Um, I low-key love this pick. I feel
Human
like,
bulldozer.
yeah, human bulldozer. Is that the new trash can full of dirt?
Absolutely it is.
Um, I also, you and I, you sent me that video of his family, you know, the 6-minute video of his family describing him, again, the human side of things, always bringing the human side of things to this. And like, he went to his dad's alma mater, Duke, and his dad was a running back, and he got too big to play running back, so they made him an offensive lineman. And again, a captain, like just a well-respected human being in that locker room. I think Graham Barton got a lot of the buzz, so he got a little overshadowed in this. And I mean, fair, first round pick versus a fifth round pick, but this is a guy who's going to bring a lot, you said it, versatility, but just like a lot of capability along the line. And they think that's something the Packers really covet. They love someone who can come in and potentially like swing. And I think that's what he's going to end up being, kind of like a swing interior offensive lineman. And that can't really be understated. And I also think like competition at center is really necessary. Josh Myers hasn't necessarily panned out as the Packers would have hoped as their starting center. And if this can be the push that they need, great. They also like need the depth there, like really badly. I mean, we watched as like one injury. You're one injury away from Royce Newman starting. So we don't need that here. So, and a really smart player. I think that's like my other like takeaway from all the rest that we've said so far is like when you listen to him speak, just really high football IQ as well.
Yeah, and somebody that, multiple scouts said that players want to follow. So, like,
Yeah,
to find that kind of leader in the 5th round, I think is big. And another, again, these are the buzzwords: versatility, leadership. Like,
right. And Brian Gutekunst said every single person in the Packers building who was involved in the draft process wanted him.
yeah,
Every single person, which like I don't know. I don't know
I feel
if
like
I've
that
ever
can
heard some.
happen. Yeah.
No, I don't know if I've ever heard someone say that before about a prospect. So they are very happy to have him.
Yeah, let's talk about the other
Your
5th
guy,
round pick that, the
take
Packers
take
made.
it away.
We didn't think it could happen, right? Kitano Ladapo, the safety. In the DMs, we were like, "Oh, I don't know, they already took 2 safeties. Would they really, do it again?" And they did. Um, just a different body type than the other safeties that they picked up as well. He's bigger. Um, per PFF, I thought this was really interesting. He was the highest graded run defender of all the safeties drafted. So really physical, really good against the run. 3-year start at Oregon State. Um, John Eric Sullivan, in his draft report said that he's aggressive and when he hits you, you go down. Like he is just a very good box safety, physical, will get downhill and wrap you up, and really good against the run, which I think is something that we've seen in previous defenses. Um, Not always the Packers' strong suit. So really
Yeah,
competitive and will get to the ball and attack.
yeah. Comped to Jamal Adams, I've seen and heard. So that's an interesting one. Um, yeah, I was a little surprised the Packers took 3.
Mhm.
Obviously happy that it's him because he's a bit of a draft crush. Um, Also just a different type of player than Javon Bullard and Evan Williams, right? So it's not like they've been redundant here. Definitely more of that like hybrid inside linebacker type player. They've tried that out before. We'll
Right.
see if it works right this time. Again, new scheme, new DC. We'll see what Halfley wants to do with him. But again, just like I think really good value for this guy. I don't know. I could have seen him going earlier than this. So
Yeah, he was certainly one of the players that I watched really early in the draft process, and I tweeted it in, like, February, I think. I said something like, "Boy, it's too early to have draft crushes, but he sure would be fun in Jeff Hafley's defense," and that was before they got Xavier McKinney, but now that they have Xavier
Right.
McKinney as, like, a roaming free safety, just get you a guy that can thump and, like, attack downhill in the box, and I think he's just a very good complement for McKinney and to kind of play that heavier role because he's like 220 pounds almost, like 6'2". He's a big dude
Yeah.
and he's athletic. So he can play safety, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they put him in some sub packages as kind of a shiftier linebacker, the same way we've seen the Isaiah Simmons of the world and some of those like tweeners.
Hmm. 220. Damn. No wonder he got the Jamal Adams comp. That's a big boy.
Yeah, he's a big dude. All right, 6th round pick. The Packers did what we expected them to do, right? Took their third offensive lineman of the draft, offensive tackle, Travis Glover out of Georgia State. I believe it was Wes that said that he was actually the first Packers. No, yeah, I think the first selection out of Georgia State. And Glover actually knew Montrevious Adams from his hometown. So another former Packers pick there. But definitely projects as a swing tackle at the next level. Probably not somebody that they will be kicking to the interior, but has a ton of tackle experience, played primarily left tackle, and should be able to compete immediately with like Caleb Jones, Luke Tenuta, some of those other depth pieces for a backup swing job.
Yeah, awesome. We knew the Packers would probably leave this draft with multiple offensive linemen. They did. This is their third. This is their late round guy. This is their late round developmental guy. They usually take, as we said earlier, the tackles, see what they can do, where they can put them. I think he's just like a perfect prototype for what they usually invest in these later rounds. I can't say I have watched his tape yet, so that's where I'm at with Travis Glover, but I think it fits exactly with what the Packers like to do in terms of like their 6th round offensive lineman.
Well, and I think what's been a theme too that we haven't necessarily talked about as much is also the Senior Bowl and how much that helped some of these guys that, like you're playing at Georgia State, right? You're not going up against maybe the level of competition that you would if you were a Georgia or Bama prospect. So Goody and his scouts getting the chance to see some of these guys in against stiffer competition, you could argue, I think really helped his case here as, a draft prospect. 7th round, I like both of these selections a lot. I think they're both really fun with a lot of upside. Quarterback Michael Pratt, the first selection in the 7th out of Tulane, regarded honestly as one of the like better developmental prospects in this quarterback class, has a lot of upside to work with, a lot of like kind of raw intangibles, and who better to work with a player like that than Tom Clemens and Matt LaFleur. So just really fun to see some of his tape, and should, I think, come in and compete for a backup role against Sean Clifford. Oop, you're muted.
Oh, I saw Greg Rosenthal tweet something like, of course, the Packers take like the perfect developmental quarterback because what better team than the team that does the best at drafting and developing quarterbacks? I think, yeah, I mean, Goot said, I'm going to probably, like, everything Goot told us he was going to do in this draft, he did. Like, he told no
The
lies.
ultimate foreshadowing.
Yeah, he told 0 lies. He said we were going to take a quarterback. He took a quarterback. Like, look, like, is Michael Pratt going to see the field outside of preseason? Like, God, I hope not. Is he going to compete for QB2 against Sean Clifford? Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Mhm.
I think he's stepping into like probably a 7th round picks dream in working with Tom Clements. Like, you aren't going to step into a better situation for yourself if you're hoping for any kind of future in the NFL. I think the dream here would be to flip him at
Yep.
some point, right? Yeah.
All right.
Jordan Love Hasselback.
There you go. Last pick, I think you and I are both pretty excited about this one. Kalen King, the corner out of Penn State, widely regarded as a potential first round pick, had a really incredible 2022 season, 21 pass breakups and 3 picks that year, and then didn't play as well in 2023 and didn't have the best testing. But he's 21 years old, has a ton of athletic upside, and I think the way he said it himself, the fact that he slid all the way into the seventh put a chip on his shoulder. You could tell he was really emotional about it, and he just wants to come in and compete. And those are the kind of guys I think that really round out a room. So huge upside in a selection like that in the seventh.
Yeah. I mean, this is an interesting one, right?
Mhm.
Because he was like slated to be a first round pick in 2022 and then
Yeah.
to slide all the way to the seventh round. That's got to be a really wild emotional ride for him. Um, I was trying to do some research as to why the slide, and genuinely, it's because he just had like not his best year in 2023. He got like decimated by Marvin Harrison Jr. of like, okay, a generational wide receiver, and didn't test that great. Um, this could potentially be like a steal for the Packers in the seventh round because again, like seventh round picks, it's like if they don't pan out, okay, they don't pan out. But if you get a player like a Carrington Valentine who played really well in his rookie season, a second Carrington Valentine, like, wow, that's a steal. Um, a lot of the guys who played against him or with him came out on Twitter and were like, this guy is not a seventh round pick. I mean, Jaden Reed posted that they were DMing. Sauce Gardner was like, this guy is a steal. So it's feeling like it's a great swing on a guy in the seventh round. I watched him, like, I've watched some of his tape, and like, I get the 2023 stuff, right? Like when you don't play your best ball and that's like the last taste you leave in people's mouths. But like, man, this guy can tackle. Like this guy is a ready and willing tackler. He's definitely, I think, more of an attacker in the run game.
Mhm.
I mean, he's good on the sideline. Don't get me wrong. He's like good on the boundary, but like he really stood out to me as like a corner in the run game, which is not something the Packers have, right? Like respectfully, Jaw doesn't really get in there. So I think he's going to be a good guy to bring in. Obviously has experience in the snow and in the cold weather. Um, and I think that chip on his shoulder is going to give him the juice to really compete and bring his all. And that's the kind of fire you want. It's going to be really fun. And I think, look, obviously the Packers think their cornerback room is where it should be, right? Even, Matt was asked about it in his press conference. He said Stokes looks great, Jaw looks great, everybody looks great. Awesome. Wonderful. But I do think corner is a position you should be replenishing regardless every year in the draft. So I'm glad they
Right.
did nab someone.
And exactly. I mean, to your point about depth, we saw what it looked like last season when Jair was hurt. And, it was kind of a revolving door. Nixon, Douglas being traded away. Like, you're always a couple injuries away from being just completely decimated at a position. And, possibly a seventh round pick doesn't change that too much. But we're talking about a guy that was slated to be a first rounder, not to, keep reiterating this point, and then was like 2 picks away from being undrafted.
Yeah.
Like, that's such an insane perspective shift, and I think that when you round out that room with guys that want it that desperately, that's where the best competition comes, and you've got Jair and Nixon, and we talked about this a little bit in the DMs too, but, like, the mentality and the swagger of some of these guys, like, you kinda have to have that to play a corner in the NFL anyway, but you've got Jair and Nixon and Valentine, and then you bring in a guy with, like, a just pyramid-sized chip on his shoulder, and it's like, okay, there's some dogs here, and I think that's just gonna be a lot of fun to see in training camp and against, like, if we get, like, a Jaden Reed King rematch in training camp, that'll be a ton of fun too.
Yeah. I think the attitude swag levels in that DB room have reached like new heights when you add Xavier McKinney and Javon Bullard because I don't know, man. Yeah, I'm excited for Kalen King. I think he's going to be a really easy guy to root for,
Yeah.
given everything. And I hope he succeeds. I hope he gets back to his 2022 form, because if he gets back to his 2022 form, you're getting a guy who was potentially a first round pick, and that's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah, which is something that we thought the Packers could do, right? We thought corner could be a sneaky need in the first and a selection that they make. So to gamble and have it pay off like that is, I think it makes a ton of sense for Green Bay and, the future of the position. But that is the recap of the 2024 Packers draft class. We will have additional videos obviously coming out about this class. We'll talk about the undrafted free agents that Green Bay brought in. We're hoping in the near future to get the schedule released so we can talk about the Packers schedule and how they'll line up against all the other teams that just had really good draft classes as well. But yeah, Perry, any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
No, we said at the top of the show, but like, I love this class. I'm so excited for what they're going to add to this team. I think the Packers are in like full contention mode now. Obviously we have to see them play, but I just feel like Goot knocked it out of the park again on paper. And I want to hear everyone's thoughts. Who's your favorite player? Tell us in the comments who you think who's going to contribute right away, who you're most excited about. This is a fun time. Now we just get to look forward to training camp and the schedule and the season.
Yeah,
We're almost there.
we did it. All right. Thank you, as always, for listening to the show. You can find the podcast on Twitter at PWSS Podcast or, on YouTube. If you're finding us in video format, please like and subscribe if you don't already. We super appreciate it. You can find the audio format of the podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Odyssey. You can find Perry on Twitter at Perry_Goldstein. You can find me on Twitter at Maggie J. Loney. Thank you, as always, for listening to the show. We had such a fun draft season and can't wait to see these guys on the field. Go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.